Hello, welcome to week 9 of engineering management. So I hope everything is going well for you this term. We are certainly winding down. Well, let's take a look at management from a global perspective. So one of the important things for us to look at is managers or potential managers is the fact that the world is changing in front of us, and it's changing rapidly. So we see a number of aspects of our existence that have changed. So when we think about the world around us, we think about managing our businesses with the environment in mind, and certainly looking not just at profit, but at people, planet, and profit. There's a trend towards away from what we used to think of when we thought of manufacturing, which was mass production, towards a more customization and personalization of products and services. Certainly innovation has taken off, and we've seen with the advent of new technology and rapidly advancing technology that we have had to adapt in our business and our personal life quite a bit. So add to that the fact that we are a very mobile society, and we keep in touch now using tools like social media. So we're going to talk in a minute here about Globalization 4.0, which is a new-ish phenomenon that has been identified, and bring into that the idea that the world is crashing forward at a much faster pace, and we are being asked to adapt even more quickly than before. So you'll see that we'll bring this full circle to see what this means to engineers and engineering managers. But we're going to draw on expertise from many of you who happen to be in the millennial or Generation Z generation. So Generation Z would be those who were born between 1995 and 2010, depending on which scholar you listen to. But Generation Z is our first fully digital native generation. And so as such, they approach the world much differently, and we can learn some good lessons from you folks. So what is globalization? We talk about globalization in all of our business classes, and hopefully in many of the other classes that you take. So this is really about the world shrinking. It's about moving from sort of these regional or local economies to a very global interconnected economy. And it's this shift towards that global economy, which we have arrived, right? So anything that happens in one area of the globe will often just explode through the entire economy and affect other countries and other regions, etc. We also have seen a shrinking of time and space. So we can hop onto one of our electronic devices and travel anywhere in the world. We can talk to people anywhere in the world. So for companies and organizations, this provides a lot of new opportunities, but with it comes a lot of risks as well. So when we talk about globalization, we refer to obviously the economy. And what does that mean? For an organization or company, we're talking about the markets, the marketplace within this global economy. So we see that, it used to be we talk about, the Oregon economy, the California economy, the US economy, and we still do to a certain extent. But when we are talking about the economy, we're really talking about globally, because we can cross borders even as a small business. We can put up a website and sell our goods anywhere in the world. So we also, this coming together of people, ideas, communication affects how we look at products and services as well. We see other things in other parts of the world that we like and that we might wish to have ourselves. So it is this very open arena for us to share ideas as well as products. Where did this come from? Well, we saw a falling of trade barriers in particular, and borders, traversing borders after World War II. World War II was hopefully considered the last world war of significance, and you'll see as a result of that, we can see the development and creation of the European Union. Many European companies who have been at war for centuries decided if they were more connected economically, they would be less likely to go to war against each other. And so this has developed into our modern European Union. And we see that companies have realized that if they have more open trading policies, that connects us even more. And so we need to learn about other countries, other cultures, etc. So this was the hope. And what has fueled this globalization is this rapid advance in all kinds of technology. So politically, we've seen some changes as well. We saw the fall of many command economies. So we've talked about economies around the world, that there are, the very capitalist economies, more socialist economies, and then the command economies, where the government dictates pretty much the entire economy, what kinds of businesses, industry, etc., are occurring. So we saw the falling of the former Soviet Union in 1989, and the development of many smaller European countries, particularly Eastern European countries, many of whom decided that they wanted a more open economy and embrace some capitalistic processes. We see also similar trends in China and Latin America. Now, it feels recently like China has become very, very entrenched in this authoritarian government, although we do know they are also very interested in trying to infuse some sort of entrepreneurial spirit where they can create and innovate as well. And so this is a struggle that they've had in dealing with this. So it is important for us to understand various cultures around the world, particularly if we're going to do business together or share labor forces or clients around the world. So I want to introduce you to Gerhard Hofstede's work. In the late 1980s, he probably conducted the most seminal, certainly the first study of its size, looking at global cultures. And he wanted to eliminate as many other factors as he could. So he was concerned that if he just looked at a bunch of companies, that the company culture would be difficult to distinguish between company culture and country culture. So he looked at only facilities within IBM. So IBM at that time was a very large global company, and it had offices around the world. So he stayed within that so that there would be the same corporate culture. Anyway, he determined first four and then added a fifth dimension on which we look at cultures and our understanding of how people do business, how they lead, how they communicate and make decisions, process information, etc. So you can see on our chart in front of you that each category has a two-way arrow. And it's to signify that a country isn't just an individualistic country or a collective country. There's somewhere on that spectrum, okay? And so by studying the ways in which people function, we can see where they lie on this chart. And by doing so, if we see that we're doing business with a company that is very different from us, that means we need to do more work in understanding their business practices and the cultural differences that could get in the way, right? And on the other hand, help us engage in better processes. So I have a couple of pictures here I wanted to share. So this is what I call circling the Arc de Triomphe, which I did with a friend in a car. We didn't mean to, but we were trying to find our hotel. We were following our virtual map, and it took us down this road, and all of a sudden we were circling the Arc de Triomphe. The interesting thing here is that there are no lines on the road, right? Look at this. People are circling around. We went around 5 times. People kept getting close, and it pushed us farther and farther into the center, and we couldn't figure out how to get back out. We didn't want to get run over. but everybody else seemed to be doing it. They were flying around and then they were flying off. And so, by the way, Arc de Triomphe, for those of you who aren't familiar, is in Paris. But anyway, we finally figured out you just have to go. But what's fascinating is that in this culture, people understand. They don't need lines on a road. They intuitively understand how this works. And you can think of cultures, particularly their context. So some cultures have a high context, some a low context. What that means is, so for instance, in the United States, we're very literal. We like to make sure that we are very detailed in our instructions, our signs, everything, so that nothing is left to chance. You walk through an airport and there's a sign every few feet that tells you where you're going, where to go, arrows, etc. Our streets are well marked, for the most part. We love contracts. We love codifying things, writing things down, making sure that everything is taken care of on some sort of document. Other cultures, on the other hand, are more fluid and they intuit what they should be doing and how they should interact with other people, and might even be offended if you place a contract in front of them. So here's another example of Chinese traffic. This was in Shanghai a few years ago. I was actually on, sorry about that. I was actually on a bus traveling through Shanghai downtown. And this is not unusual. And another thing we learned as visitors in China, particularly in a large city like Shanghai, is that pedestrians take to the road at their own risk, that it is up to you to cross the street carefully. And that, if you get hurt, it's your own fault. So it was, Chinese citizens had no trouble crossing streets. We Americans were completely lost. There wasn't any little signal that said stop, go, etc. Right? Okay, so another dimension that we talk about sometimes is time. So there's monochronic time and polychronic time. In the US, we are a culture that is more monochronic. In other words, we watch time go by. We watch time pass. We think of time as a thing. Like I mentioned, it passes, it stops. We stop time, we save time. We make sure we're on time and we value this, right? And other cultures see time as really just this fluid part of the natural world. And so, for instance, maybe in a Latin culture, you might arrive at an appointed time, and the people you're meeting may or may not be ready for you. They may be engaged in conversation with somebody else, which they will conclude maybe before they talk to you, or they just might invite you in and everybody's talking at the same time. So these are things that we need to be aware of. This is not disrespectful in that culture, but you might think so in a US culture. Another cultural dimension that we sometimes think about is space. So in the United States, we think that 1 arm's length is about appropriate for a distance between 2 people when you're speaking to one another. In other cultures, it's much closer. So I know, for instance, in France, when I was there, the distance is much closer, and they're very comfortable with a more intimate space. So in the picture that you're looking at, we see on the right is a very crowded space. But think about this: if you live in, say, an island country with a high level of population, there's very little space. And so people are going to learn to coexist very closely together. So for instance, in the Japanese culture, they are able to create a distance around themselves mentally, and by sort of shutting out those people who are very close to them. So again, different things for different cultures. And again, it's just really important to understand that these differences exist, and there isn't a right way or a wrong way. There's just differences. Okay, so this is a link to a short video and I am loading it in Canvas under week 9 for you to take a look at. It is actually fairly entertaining. It's not very long, and it's sort of the shoe on the other foot. So it takes place at Columbia University, and they have a huge international global student population. So this is an orientation session with all of their, many of their international students coming to this session to learn how to understand Americans. And so it is titled How to Spot American When You See One. And so it's kind of funny because you can see how confusing we might be. And when you think about from a different cultural perspective. And when you think about that, you have to realize that we think the way we do things is the way everybody does things or wants to do things, but that's not the case. And so it's important for us to be more inclusive in our communication with others, particularly from other cultures. Okay, so I mentioned we'd circle back to managing and to engineering. So how can we manage global operations? So first of all, it depends on the purpose of our particular facility or company or whatever. So some companies who are quite large adapt a think global, act local policy. And what that means is that we adhere to our global corporate values and mission and vision, but that when we're in different locales, those clients, customers, et cetera, may have different needs. So for instance, if you think about Home Depot, they have many stores across our country, but you're going to see different products in Minnesota than you will in Florida. So for instance, in Florida, you're not going to see a whole bunch of snow blowers, right? That doesn't mean that Office Depot is so different in Florida than it is in Minnesota. It just means that they are also thinking locally. So a company can take a very global focus, or they can dial in for a region kind of country focus in how they adapt their products and that sort of thing, okay? So I do want to kind of end this lecture talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So we have been for a long time in what we call the Third Industrial Revolution. So you can see here from this little chart, the First Industrial Revolution came with the steam engine. We know the history of that, most of us. And then we moved into the next phase of that, which was mass production, electricity, et cetera. And then this third industrial revolution, which was electronic, and that's when we're aware of information technology, automation, things like that. And now we have recently moved into the fourth industrial revolution, which is very cyber dominated. So here's some dates. And again, it depends on which historians or scholars that you talk to, but these are very, these are dates that are pretty well cemented, and give or take a year or two on either side, you'll find that they are pretty standard. So according to Klaus Schwab, who's the founder of the World and executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, in 2018, at one of the Global Economic Forum meetings, he announced this, that we stand on the brink of a technological revolution that will fundamentally alter the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, its scope, and complexity, the transformation will be unlike anything humankind has experienced before. And he talked about this as a way of announcing that the fourth industrial revolution had arrived. And so what does that mean? How are we different? So we are looking at these types of breakthroughs and advances, certainly machine to machine communication. We're using robotics a lot more, nanotechnology, biotechnology. If we look back at the introduction of vaccines in the pandemic, we see that this was the speed was also possible because of these technological advances and revolution. So a lot is happening. What is different about the fourth industrial revolution is that we're seeing breakthroughs in multiple areas at the same time crashing together. So it's the speed of which this is happening is exponential. And the one thing we know is that there will be surprise after surprise after surprise for our managers, and certainly for those who are creating engineering breakthroughs for the future. So this fourth industrial revolution, as I mentioned, is this fusion of multiple worlds, right? It's not just digital. And it's really disruptive because so much is happening. And the change is rapid. So I kind of feel like the word change is no longer this big thing. It's just part of who we are now. We adapt constantly without even realizing it. It's become part of who we are and who and what our businesses are. So my question I'd like to leave you with is, what do you think about this? How can engineers and managers adapt to this new disruptive era, this new industrial age? What does it mean for you as engineers in your specific field? And what are the opportunities? What are the risks? It's an exciting time